My name is Clara Evans, and for 60 years I believed my marriage was a quiet, dignified partnership. I was wrong. I was a fool. The end of my life was peaceful. At 82 I simply closed my eyes and slipped away. Or so I thought. Instead of nothingness, my consciousness lingered, a wisp of smoke trapped in the currents of time. I thought it was a blessing, a final chance to watch over my husband, Arthur, and our son, Daniel. I imagined my love was so strong it tethered me to them. I watched my own funeral. Arthur, ever the stoic professor, wore his usual expression of serene detachment. Daniel, a man in his 50s, was solemn. I felt a pang of sorrow for their loss, a twisted pride in the life I had built for them. That pride curdled into ash just 1 month later. The wedding was a lavish affair, a stark contrast to my quiet funeral. And the groom was my husband, Arthur. The bride was his first love, Isabella. I floated, a ghost at the feast, watching the man I had shared a bed with for 6 decades smile like a giddy youth. The deep wrinkles on his face contorted into a mask of pure joy, a sight I had rarely been privileged to see. He took the microphone, his voice thick with an emotion I never knew he possessed. "We may not have much time left," he declared to the applauding crowd, "but to spend even a few years with a partner whose heart and mind match mine is still a blessing. Being with someone who shares your interests makes even a moment eternal. Being with someone you don't love makes every moment pain." The words were a physical blow. Each one was a nail in the coffin of our shared history. A lifetime of compromise, of sacrifice, was reduced to "every moment is pain." Then the screen lit up with photographs of them in their youth. Arthur, handsome and vibrant, his eyes alight with a warmth forever absent in our photos. Isabella was delicate, her smile gentle. And then came the letters. Dozens of them, their elegant handwriting a testament to a correspondence that had never ceased, not for 60 years. The audience cooed and applauded. "What a true gentleman Professor Evans is," someone murmured. "A shame his first wife was such an uneducated tigress. He wasted his life with her." The final betrayal came from my own son. Daniel took the stage and embraced Isabella. "Aunt Isabella," he said, his voice full of warmth, "you have no idea how much I've wished for a gentle and understanding mother like you." He didn't need to say the rest. The meaning was clear. I, his mother who had fought for every opportunity he ever had, was the obstacle to his happiness. I was the harshness in his life, the source of the pain. In that moment, the happy marriage I had cherished revealed itself as a grotesque lie. The serene husband was a fraud, and the son I had poured my soul into was a stranger who saw me as a burden. The weight of this truth was a crushing black despair. I wished for true oblivion. Then I opened my eyes. The scent of stale coffee and old books filled my nostrils. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I was standing in a familiar hallway, the administrative wing of the university where Arthur worked. A man was speaking to me, his tone placating. "Clara, you can't say I stole the professor's spot to go abroad." When the leader asked him, he himself said he didn't care whether he went and would follow whatever arrangement was made. Of course, I should give the chance to the colleague who actively fights for it. Memory slammed into me with the force of a tidal wave. This was the day. The day Arthur's study abroad spot had been given to a more aggressive colleague, Hank. The day I, burning with a sense of injustice, had stormed the university to fight for what was rightfully his. The day I earned the nickname Tigress, that would follow me to my grave. And there he was. My husband. Arthur Evans. His hand was on my sleeve, tugging impatiently. His face, younger but already set in its mask of lofty indifference, was pinched with annoyance. "Clara, let's go," he hissed. "We're educated people. We can't make a scene like this. It isn't dignified." The feeling of his fingers on my arm, the sound of his voice, the sheer infuriating hypocrisy of it all. It was real. I was back. The ghostly pain of betrayal solidified into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in my chest. Heaven had felt my overwhelming resentment and given me a second chance. I looked at Arthur, truly looked at him. I saw the man who would let me do his dirty work, who would let me become the villain in his story so he could remain the saint. I saw the man who, for 60 years, had written love letters to another woman while I managed the mundane miseries of our life. A strange calm settled over me. I had spent a lifetime being his shield. This time I would step aside and let the world see the real Arthur Evans. I subtly shifted my arm, breaking his grip. I completely changed my tone, painting a smile on my face as I turned back to the department head, Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice sweet and reasonable. Arthur did tell me he didn't care about these external matters, but when he came home he seemed quite upset. I thought he really wanted this spot, so I came here for that reason. I let out a light, self-deprecating laugh. Looks like I misunderstood. You did the right thing. Opportunities should go to those who take the initiative to fight for them. The silence was profound. Everyone from Mr. Davies to the smirking Hank stared at me. Arthur's grip on my sleeve had gone slack, his face a comical mask of confusion. Mr. Davies was the first to recover, a broad, relieved smile spreading across his face. Well, I'll be. Didn't expect you to be so understanding, Clara. That's just perfect. The professor always said you are hard to deal with. But now I see you have to spend time with someone to really know what they're like. He turned to Arthur, clapping him on the shoulder with a knowing look. Arthur, if you want something, just say so. You act all lofty every day, so we assume you don't want anything. Naturally, we wouldn't arrange anything for you. Don't worry, there will be plenty of opportunities to study abroad. If it doesn't work out this time, I'll make sure you're first in line next time. Arthur's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He tried to form a sentence to explain, but what could he say? To protest would be to admit he was a hypocrite. In the end, he just gave an awkward, strangled smile. Clara, don't worry, Mr. Davies said to me as he prepared to leave. With you supporting the school's work like this, I'll be sure to spread the word about how virtuous and considerate you are. With that, he and the others left, their cheerful chatter echoing down the hall. Arthur and I were alone. The moment the others were out of sight, his placid expression shattered. His face darkened into a thundercloud. Clara, he seethed, his voice low and furious. Why would you say that? How could you tell them what we talk about at home? I looked at him, this man I had loved and served, and I felt nothing but a chilling clarity. I finally understood his game. He cared about everything. The promotions, the recognition, the opportunities, but he didn't want to dirty his hands. He would play the wounded, misunderstood scholar to me, knowing my protective instincts would flare up. He would push me into the fray and then have the gall to resent me for the methods I used to win his battles. My little performance today had not only cost him the spot he secretly coveted, but it had also peeled back a corner of the saintly facade he presented to the world. I had exposed the petty, calculating man hiding behind the mask of detachment. I smiled at him, a cold, sharp thing. Didn't you just tell me to stop making a scene and go home? I was only listening to you. Is that wrong? I tilted my head, feigning innocence. Besides, you've always said we walk the straight path and have nothing to hide from others. Unless, of course, your words aren't something you can repeat in public. He was speechless. I had never spoken to him like this before. I had always been the fiery one, yes, but my fire was always in service to him. This was a different kind of fire. One meant to consume, not warm. He stared at me, his jaw working soundlessly. After a long, tense moment, he shook his sleeves in a gesture of pure frustration. Unbelievable, he muttered and turned on his heel, striding away toward home without a backward glance. I watched him go, the cold diamond in my chest growing harder. This was only the beginning. The tigress was gone. In her place was something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to reveal. I walked home slowly, allowing the reality of my rebirth to settle deep into my bones. The world was the same modest university housing complex, the same rustling sycamore trees, but I was fundamentally altered. The meek, hopeful Clara who had lived here was a ghost, and I was her vengeful spirit. Our home was an old apartment allocated by the university. 2 bedrooms and a study, not large, but I had always kept it warm and tidy, a sanctuary from the world. As I pushed the door open, I heard the definitive click of the study door locking. Arthur's retreat. His fortress of solitude. Whenever he was unhappy, which was often, or after we quarreled, which was frequent, that's where he would go. In my previous life, I'd come to see it as a necessary pressure valve for his sensitive nature. Now I saw it for what it was. A petulant withdrawal, a passive-aggressive punishment that would only end when I swallowed my pride and apologized. In the past, I would have already been planning my conciliatory approach, maybe brewing his favorite tea. Now I looked at the closed door and felt nothing but a profound weariness. Stay in there forever, I thought coldly. Spare me the performance. The front door opened again and my son Daniel came in, his school bag slung carelessly over one shoulder. He was 14, all lanky limbs and a burgeoning sense of teenage entitlement. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, gave a painful, involuntary lurch. This was my boy, the child I had carried, nursed, and fiercely loved. But the memory of the man he would become, the one who would sigh and wish for a gentler mother at my funeral, lay between us like a shroud. He glanced at the closed study door and his young face immediately soured. "Mom," he said, his tone dripping with accusation, "what did you do to upset Dad again? You're always focused on those petty material things. Stop picking stupid fights with him over trivial stuff." The words, so similar to the ones I'd heard from his 50-year-old self, hit me like a physical slap. So his allegiance to his father, his disdain for me, had taken root this early. I had given up my own career at the textile factory to raise him, had supervised every homework assignment, had scrimped and saved to ensure he had every opportunity. And in his eyes I was just a nagging, materialistic shrew. I pressed on, a desperate, foolish part of me still hoping for a different response. "Daniel, aren't you even going to ask why we argued? Shouldn't you at least figure out who's right and who's wrong?" He rolled his eyes, a gesture of supreme teenage contempt. "Do I really need to ask? Dad's not the type to nitpick. It's you who's always looking for trouble. Without you stirring things up, we wouldn't have so many problems at home." He dropped his bag on the floor with a thud. "Mom, can't you try being a little gentler? Dad likes gentle women. It's completely normal he wouldn't like a tigress like you." The room seemed to tilt. Dad likes gentle women. How did a 14-year-old boy know what kind of women his father preferred? Unless he'd heard it from the source. My chest went cold. I stared at him, my voice dangerously level. "And how do you know your dad doesn't like me and prefers gentle women? Where did you hear that?" A flicker of guilt crossed his face, so fast I would have missed it if I weren't watching so closely. He looked away, shuffling his feet. "I guessed. Who would like someone as fierce as you? Of course he'd like gentle women." With that he turned quickly toward his bedroom. "I still have homework. Call me when dinner's ready." He was lying. I was his mother, I knew his tells. In the past I'd had to nag him relentlessly to do his homework. He'd never been this eager to shut himself away. The realization was a final icy douse of water, extinguishing the last ember of maternal hope. My son had long known about Arthur and Isabella. He had not only kept his father's secret but had been a willing accomplice, probably fantasizing about Isabella replacing me. The hurt was a sharp, clean cut, followed by a strange sense of relief. Good. Now I knew. There were no more illusions to shatter, no more bonds to hold me back. I could act without hesitation. I looked around the tidy living room at the home I had maintained with such dutiful care. The thought of cooking a meal for these two, the hypocritical husband and the disloyal son, who expected dinner to appear magically without ever lifting a finger, made me nauseous. Forget it. I walked into our bedroom and pulled a small suitcase from the closet. I packed a set of practical clothes, my personal documents, and the small box of jewelry that had been my mother's. I didn't need much. I was not running away from home. I was launching an escape. I needed an ally. I needed my best friend, Marianne Scott. Marianne had gone into the clothing business, something Arthur had always looked down upon as crass and unscholarly. But the truth was, in these booming 1980s, Marianne was making tens of thousands a year, while Arthur was supporting our whole family on a monthly salary of just a few dozen dollars. After our marriage, he had repeatedly tried to sour my friendship with her. "She's a bad influence, Clara," he'd say. "Her values are all about money. You'll lose your refinement." With housework and managing Arthur's career piling up, my contact with her had gradually faded. Just last year she had asked me to help with her business. I had been tempted, but with Arthur's vehement opposition I had refused. Now I worried she might have grown distant from me. But I couldn't think of anyone more suitable to turn to. I took a deep breath and headed for her boutique, a place called Scott's Trends. I had visited only a handful of times. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The shop was a vibrant explosion of color and texture, a world away from the muted academic tones of my life. Marianne emerged from the back, her face breaking into a wide, genuine smile when she saw me. "Clara. My God, it's so good to see you." She enveloped me in a warm, perfumed hug. Then she noticed the suitcase in my hand. Her smile faded, replaced by concern. What's going on? I didn't mince words. The dam had broken. Marianne, I need your help. I plan to get a divorce. Instead of shock or pity, her face lit up with fierce joy. She even clapped her hands. Finally, you've come to your senses. That man never loved you, Clara. I've been wanting to tell you to stop being his doormat for years. She grabbed my hands, her eyes sparkling. So, how do you want me to help? Tears of relief pricked at my eyes. I had not completely failed. I still had a friend I could rely on. I need you to help me find a good divorce lawyer, I said, my voice steadying. Lend me a camera. And help me get in touch with a newspaper reporter. I took a deep breath. And, would you still be willing to hire me to work with you? Marianne agreed without a moment's hesitation. Of course. I'd be thrilled to have you. You have a better eye for fabric and cut than anyone I know. I hugged her in return, showing my first genuine smile since being reborn. It felt like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in decades. It felt good. At Marianne's warm invitation, I stayed at her apartment for 3 days, planning my strategy and steeling my resolve. On the 4th day I returned home. I deliberately chose a time when both Arthur and Daniel would be at work and school. The place was a mess. Dishes were piled in the sink and a layer of dust was already settling on the furniture. It was astonishing how quickly order had decayed without my constant unseen labor. I went straight to Arthur's study. In the past he'd always insisted that even between husband and wife, we had to respect each other's privacy. So, apart from cleaning, I had never stepped foot in there, never snooped. I had given him all the respect he demanded, and in return he had kept a 60-year correspondence with his first love behind my back. Now that very habit of his expectation of my blind trust, made my task easy. It took me less than a minute to find the letters. They were sitting right in the top drawer of his desk, not even locked away. He was that arrogant, that sure of my devotion. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. So this was what Arthur relied on. He thought my love for him made me blind and stupid. I pulled out the bundle of envelopes, tied with a simple ribbon. My hands trembled slightly, not with heartbreak but with a cold, focused rage. Even though I'd already seen these letters once at their wedding in my previous life, looking at them now, holding the physical proof of his betrayal, made my stomach churn. The elegant script on the envelopes was Isabella's. I didn't need to read them all. A quick scan of a few was enough. They were full of longing, poetry, and tender inquiries about his life. Their life, the one he was supposedly trapped in with me. I worked quickly. I used the camera Marianne had lent me to photograph every page, every envelope with its postmark. The steady click whir of the camera was a satisfying sound, a weapon being loaded. When I was done, I gathered the originals and placed them back in the drawer exactly as I had found them. The photos were my insurance. The originals were my bait. Then I sat down in Arthur's own chair, the letters in my lap, and waited for the 2 Evans men to come home. The stage was set. The confrontation was coming. And this time I was ready. The wait was strangely peaceful. Sitting in Arthur's sacred study, surrounded by the evidence of his duplicity, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in either of my lifetimes. The love that had once clouded my judgment was gone, burned away by the cold fire of truth. I was no longer Clara the wife, Clara the mother. I was Clara the avenger. At a little past 7 p.m., I heard the key turn in the front door. 2 sets of footsteps entered, one measured and weary, the other a clumsy adolescent shuffle. "I'm starving," Daniel's voice complained. "What's for dinner?" There was a moment of silence as they took in the unchanged mess and my absence from the kitchen. Then Arthur's voice, hard and cold, called out, "Clara? Are you here?" I didn't answer. I remained seated, the stack of letters a tangible weight on my lap. I heard them move through the living room, their confusion turning to irritation. Arthur appeared in the study doorway, his face like thunder. The moment he saw me sitting in his chair, his eyes widened in outrage. Then his gaze dropped to the bundle in my lap and all the color drained from his face. "So you do remember to come back," he spat, trying to reclaim the moral high ground through bluster. "Is this how a wife and mother should act? Disappearing without a word? Who knows where you've been messing around?" Daniel appeared behind him, his expression a perfect mimic of his father's disapproval. "Mom, why would you leave without telling us? We were starving that day because of you. Whatever. Just go make dinner. I want sweet and sour ribs." His voice was full of blame, devoid of any concern for my well-being. The last fragile thread of my attachment to him snapped. I couldn't be bothered with pointless talk. I stood up, the letters in my hand, and simply threw them onto the table between us. They scattered, fanning out like a hand of damning cards. I may not be worthy, I said, my voice dangerously calm. But is a man who's been married over a decade and still writes to his first love every day really worthy of being a father and a husband? Arthur's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The serene, detached professor vanished, replaced by a cornered, furious animal. "Clara, are you crazy?" he roared, his voice cracking. "Don't you understand what it means to respect someone's privacy? How could you read my letters?" He lunged forward, trying to snatch them from the table. I was faster, sweeping them back into my grasp with ease. I sneered. "And respecting you got me what? Over 10 years of you secretly contacting your first love. Maybe it's time we skip the respect." His anger boiled over. The facade was not just cracked, it was shattered. "You crazy tigress," he shouted, his finger jabbing toward me. "How could I ever like someone like you? Isabella and I just exchanged the occasional greeting. Purely innocent. And you can't let it go. The world is more open now. Divorce isn't rare. I've been responsible by putting up with you. You think I'm afraid to divorce you?" At that moment, my son, my own flesh and blood, chimed in to take his father's side. "Mom, stop it already and apologize to Dad. Dad and Aunt Isabella live far apart. They just write letters sometimes. Why do you have to be so petty? The more you act like this, the less Dad will like you." He crossed his arms, delivering his final, devastating blow. "And right now you're living entirely off him. If you get divorced, where will you even go? I'm telling you now, I'm not going with you to suffer." Arthur immediately grew smug, his son's betrayal fueling his sense of righteousness. "You hear that, Clara? I'm the one supporting you. Don't take your good fortune for granted. If you divorce me, you'll know what real hardship is." I looked at this father and son pair, united against me, and the last of my sentimentality evaporated. The anger that rose in my chest was not hot and messy but cold and sharp, a precision tool. "I was a textile factory worker," I said, my voice low. "After Daniel was born and there was no one to care for him, I quit my job. When he was older and I wanted to work again, you crushed my confidence, Arthur. You said that after years away, I was out of touch and no company would hire me." I turned my gaze to Daniel. "Yet the son I raised feels no gratitude. In his eyes, you are the one who supports the family, and I am just a useless woman who can't find a job." Suddenly it all felt so pointless. The charade was over. I looked at them with a terrifying calm. "Since that's how it is, then let's get divorced." Arthur's eyes widened in disbelief. After a moment of stunned silence, he gave a cold, derisive laugh. "So, you're the one asking for divorce. Don't regret it later." "Whoever regrets it is a coward," I shot back. "Tomorrow we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau and get the divorce papers." Seeing I was resolute, Arthur's forehead bulged with rage. "Unbelievable. Have you been fooling around outside? Is that where you got this nerve?" The accusation was so typical, so pathetic that I didn't even think. My hand flew out and slapped him hard across the face. The sound was sharp and satisfying in the tense room. "Arthur Evans, if you're going to accuse someone, you'd better have proof," I hissed. "The proof of your affair is in my hands. Tell me, if I show these letters to everyone in the university compound, will your prestigious reputation as Professor Evans still hold up?" Arthur's raised hand, ready to retaliate, froze in midair. He might have claimed that he and Isabella were purely platonic, but he knew, and I knew, the intimate contents of those letters were a professional death sentence. "What do you want?" he whispered, all the fight draining out of him, replaced by a frantic fear. "What will it take for you to give them back?" I lifted the letters slightly. "The family's entire savings go to me, and I'll return the letters to you." Then I turned my gaze toward Daniel. He visibly tensed, his bravado vanishing. "I'm not going with you," he said quickly, his voice defensive. "So give up that idea." That was exactly the sentence I'd been waiting for. "You heard him," I said to Arthur, my voice flat. "If our son wants to be with you, then fine. I won't fight you for custody." I glanced around the room. "As for this place, it was assigned to you by the university. I can't take it, and naturally I won't." Arthur's face flushed red with indignation. "You're taking all the savings, Clara? You're being outrageous. That money is all from my hard work." Instead of getting angry, I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, so Professor Evans, the man who claims to be above all worldly concerns, actually cares about money? I thought only small-minded people like me cared about such things." I let the silence hang for a moment. "Your choice is simple. Either give me the money and I'll return the letters, or don't, and watch your romantic escapades spread through the entire university and faculty housing." With that, I picked up my already packed suitcase, and wheeled it out of the home I had lived in for 15 years. I didn't look back. In the end, Arthur agreed. The savings amounted to only 1,200 yuan, scraped together over the years through my own obsessive frugality. He agreed not because the money was insignificant to him, but because his reputation was everything. He couldn't bear the thought of being exposed as a hypocrite and a philanderer. Outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, after the paperwork was finalized, the two of them stood together, a united front of hostility. "Clara, I hope you don't regret your decision today," Arthur said coldly. Daniel shook his head in theatrical disapproval. "Mom, I really don't understand how you could do this. You've just torn apart a perfectly good family." I looked at them, these two strangers who had shared my name and my home, and I felt nothing. "Don't worry," I said, my voice calm and final. "From now on, you walk your sunny road and I'll cross my narrow bridge. I won't bother either of you again." Then I turned and walked away, a cold smile on my lips. Sunny road. Arthur could keep dreaming. His sunny road, I knew, was about to be swallowed by a very long, very dark shadow. And I was the one who would ensure it. The weeks following the divorce were a period of intense and purposeful reconstruction. I moved into the small dorm room above Marianne's boutique. It was simple, just a bed, a desk, and a few toiletries, but it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, my space was not dictated by Arthur's preferences or Daniel's needs. The freedom was intoxicating. I threw myself into work with Marianne. My eye for detail, honed from years of managing a household on a shoestring budget, was a perfect asset for the clothing business. I understood fabric quality, stitching, and what styles would appeal to the burgeoning professional class of women. Marianne gave me responsibilities, trusted my judgment, and for the first time I was earning my own money. It wasn't much at first, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Arthur played the victim. In a time when divorce was still a scandal, he mastered the art of the insinuating complaint. I heard the whispers through mutual acquaintances. "You know how fierce she is. Our marriage was never good. For the sake of our child, I didn't want to be the one to betray our vows." But then she spent time with that friend of hers who went into business and came back asking for a divorce. Truly an unfortunate family. When Marianne heard this, she was furious and wanted to confront him publicly. I stopped her. "Let him talk," I said, sipping my tea calmly. "When God wants to destroy someone, he first makes them mad with arrogance. His words will only make the truth, when it comes out, that much more damning." A month later, just as in my previous life, Arthur married Isabella. The news didn't surprise me. Whether at 80 or 40, Arthur was equally impatient to be with her. But their wedding this time was far less lavish. Partly because of the more modest times, but mostly because I had taken all his savings. I heard through the grapevine that he'd had to borrow money for the event, promising to repay his colleagues with the cash gifts they would bring. Marianne and I got the invitation. It was a bold, almost insulting move. I saw it for what it was. Arthur's way of proving to himself and the world that he had moved on to a better, more refined life. "You're not actually going, are you?" Marianne asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Of course I am," I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The day of the wedding I dressed carefully. I chose a simple, well-tailored dress from the boutique, elegant but understated. I wanted to look like the wronged party, not the bitter ex-wife. In my bag I carried a thick stack of photocopies. I had also, through Marianne's connections, ensured a reporter from a local newspaper was in attendance. The wedding was held in a modest banquet hall. The air was thick with the scent of cheap flowers and anticipation. Arthur and Isabella stood at the door to greet guests, with two teenage boys behind them. One was Daniel, trying to look mature and solemn. The other, a lanky, shy-looking boy, must have been Isabella's son. Arthur looked elated, his face flushed with a pride and energy I hadn't seen in years. When he saw me, his smile widened into a condescending smirk. He was playing the magnanimous man. "Clara," he said, his voice oozing false warmth. I didn't expect you to really come. I'm starting a new life now, so I won't hold past grudges against you. We can still be friends, can't we? And if you want to see your son, you're always welcome." Daniel looked openly impatient. "Who cares if she comes to see me?" he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "I have Aunt Isabella now. He's so gentle. Why would I want this tigress?" Perhaps I'd grown used to it. The words barely registered. I felt strangely calm. Without giving Daniel another glance, I stepped into the banquet hall with Marianne by my side. The wedding soon began. The bride and groom took the stage, and Arthur, just like in my last life, began to profess his deep love for Isabella. "Back then," he said, his voice dripping with false sentiment, "Isabella and I were separated by a twist of fate. But even after 16 years I never forgot her. Thankfully heaven has eyes. We both divorced and now we can be together again." He gazed at her with what looked like tears in his eyes. "To be with someone whose heart and mind align with yours. It is the most beautiful thing in the world." But this time his heartfelt confession didn't land the way it had in my past life. Because this time I was still alive, sitting right there in the audience. As soon as he finished, every head in the room turned toward me. I kept my expression calm, a mask of dignified sorrow, though my heart was pounding with a fierce, cold satisfaction. What could be sweeter than a scumbag openly admitting to emotional infidelity in front of his jilted wife? So that wasn't enough. I needed to add fuel to the fire. I stood up. The room fell into a hushed silence. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick stack of photocopies. "Since Arthur has been thinking about his first love for 16 years, I said, my voice clear and carrying, "I'm deeply touched as well. I'd like to provide everyone with a little more evidence of their great love." Then I tossed the papers into the air. They fluttered down like poisonous snow. People love gossip. The guests immediately surged forward, snatching up the copies, their eyes wide with scandalized delight. "As you can see," I continued, my tone conversational, "over the 16 years of our marriage, Arthur wrote to Isabella at least twice a month. In those letters they poured out their feelings, expressing tender affection." I paused for effect, letting the murmurs grow. "He also sent her financial support many times and even used work trips as an excuse to visit her in person. When I learned about their relationship I was moved. So I divorced him to fulfill their love." I turned my gaze to Daniel, who had gone pale. "My son also prefers a gentle stepmother like Isabella. Even knowing his father had been writing to his first love all along, he chose to hide it from me. Naturally, I respected his wishes and let him stay with his father." My words sounded magnanimous, but every syllable dripped with sarcasm. The crowd erupted. "So it wasn't just in his heart. They've been in contact all this time. And he's helped raise her kid. Wouldn't be surprising if they'd slept together too. And that son of his, what a little fool, helping his dad hide the affair. All this time, Professor Evans's been preaching morality and he's actually this kind of man. Shameless." Arthur's face grew darker by the second, his anger boiling over. "Clara," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You're breaking your word. You promised that if I gave you the savings, you'd return the letters." Before he could finish his self-incriminating sentence, Isabella tugged frantically at his sleeve. Realization dawned on his face, followed by pure horror. He had just publicly confirmed the letters were real. I gave him a small, icy smile. "I promised to give back the originals. I never said I didn't take photos or make copies, and I certainly never promised not to tell people." Arthur looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. He pointed at me, sputtering with incoherent rage. But Isabella, ever the strategist, chose that moment to enact her escape. In a sudden show of fragility, she let out a delicate moan and collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. Naturally, saving the fainting bride took priority. The scene descended into chaos as people rushed to her side. My eyesight had always been sharp, and I had caught the way her eyelids had twitched before she fell. She was faking it. A brilliant, if cowardly, tactical retreat. As the crowd carried her out, I saw the newspaper reporter scribbling furiously in his notepad, a look of sheer glee on his face. I smiled. The spectacle was complete. Overnight, Arthur Evans's reputation was ruined. The story hit the press the next day, and the university, a place that prized propriety, was swift to act. He was reassigned to a minor administrative position with no teaching duties, and all his research projects were handed over to others. The man who lived for academic recognition was now a paper-pushing pariah. Many who had attended the wedding, disgusted by his behavior, demanded their cash gifts back. Arthur, who was counting on that money to cover his debts, refused. The man who had once treated money like dirt was now having public shouting matches with colleagues over it. His relationships crumbled completely. When Marianne brought me the news, she laughed until she cried. "I used to worry you'd let him off too easily," she gasped, "but you really have a way with this. Finally, I've seen a cheating man get his payback." I smiled faintly, looking out the window of our growing boutique. "This," I said softly, "still isn't enough." Arthur had lost his reputation and his career. But he still had his new wife and his comfortable illusions. I would wait. Arrogant men like Arthur Evans never know when to stop digging. And when he started digging his own grave, I would be there, ready to give him a final push. Life settled into a new, productive rhythm. The business with Marianne flourished. My understanding of logistics and my newfound confidence in dealing with suppliers helped us expand. We moved from a single boutique to a small warehouse, supplying several other stores in the city. The seed money from the divorce, which I had taken mostly out of spite, became a genuine investment in our future. I was no longer just an employee, I was a partner. The quiet satisfaction of building something for myself was a balm on the old wounds. I rarely thought of Arthur or Daniel, but when I did, it was with a detached curiosity, like observing a specimen under glass. That curiosity was satisfied 3 months later when Daniel suddenly showed up at the warehouse. He was a pitiful sight. The clothes he wore were the same ones I had bought him the previous year, now grubby and too tight. He had lost weight and his hair was an unkempt mess. It was clear no one was taking care of him. "Mom," he whined, his voice a familiar blend of complaint and entitlement. "I haven't eaten meat in almost a month. Dad only trusts my stepmom and the kid she brought with her. He doesn't care about me at all. Can't you go talk to him?" He then poured out a story that was both predictable and pathetic. After marrying Isabella, Arthur had handed over his entire salary to her, not keeping a cent for himself. She controlled all the household finances. "At first it was great," Daniel admitted, a flicker of his old naivety in his eyes. "Aunt Isabella said children should grow up freely, so she basically left me alone. I could play as long as I wanted, skip tutoring if I felt like it." But his tone quickly soured. But the very next day she took her son Leo to those same tutoring classes. When I asked her why, she said, "The money's already paid. If he doesn't go, it's a waste." It got worse. Gradually, even toys and the meat on the table were taken away and given to Leo. "Because his little brother's health isn't good," Daniel mimicked Isabella's simpering tone. Whenever he refused, Isabella would cry to Arthur. "And Dad," Daniel said, his voice thick with betrayal, "he just frowns and says, 'Daniel, you're the older brother. Be kind to your younger brother. Don't be petty like your mother.'" Even Arthur had begun to notice the favoritism. Once he saw nearly all the meat from a dish going into Leo's bowl, with Daniel getting only a couple of pieces and Arthur himself getting none. He actually frowned and said, "Can't you just buy a little more? This isn't enough for 2 kids, let alone us," Daniel recounted. Isabella's response was a masterclass in manipulation. She immediately turned on the tears. "Your salary is barely enough as it is," she'd wailed. "How can we afford so much meat and fruit and still send both kids to extracurricular classes?" "I'd love to, but unless you can bring in more money, how is that possible?" The jab had hit Arthur's sore spot, his wounded pride and his reduced income, and he had fallen silent. Daniel's life as a cared-for son was over. I wasn't surprised. Arthur's salary had never been high, and with his lofty pride, he had no other source of income. That's exactly why I'd once scrimped and saved, turning every penny twice to keep our family afloat. He had never had to worry about money. Now, with Isabella, a woman who only knew romance and daydreams, running the household and raising 2 teenage boys, things were bound to turn out this way. Money was running short, and her loyalties were clearly to her own blood. I looked at my son, crying his eyes out, and felt that familiar, strange calm. Had he truly realized he was wrong and understood my intentions from the past? I doubted it. More likely, he was just upset at being mistreated and had come looking for my help as a last resort. Even now, he hadn't said a word about wanting to live with me. So he was my son. I couldn't ignore him completely. I took him back to my small dorm room. I'm divorced from your dad now, I told him plainly. I can't manage what goes on in your house, but if you want, you can come live here. I'll help you apply for a dorm room at your school. Daniel glanced around the Spartan room, his nose wrinkling in disdain. He compared it to the university apartment, however chaotic, that he was used to. No, he said quickly, shaking his head. I'll go back and talk to Dad. He's just been tricked by my stepmom for now. With that, he bolted out the door back to the devil he knew. I watched his retreating back, the last ember of maternal feeling finally dying out. Clearly, in his heart there was no real mother-son bond. Everything for him came down to self-interest and comfort. 2 months later, the Evans family's life seemed to have miraculously turned around. While delivering a new shipment of autumn wear to a upscale department store with Marianne, I spotted the 4 of them. They were dressed to the nines, shopping for designer brands, their arms laden with shopping bags. I froze for a moment. With Arthur's diminished salary, this kind of spending was something he couldn't afford in 100 years. Arthur spotted me from a distance. His face, which had been tense the last time I saw him, was now lit with smug satisfaction, especially when he saw me dressed in practical work clothes, sweating from carrying boxes. He stepped forward, Isabella clinging to his arm, a condescending smile plastered on his face. Clara, we were husband and wife for so many years. If you're in trouble, tell me. I can lend you money. No need to do such heavy labor. Isabella, draped in a new silk dress, added warmly, Clara, I owe my good life today to you, stepping aside. If you ever need help, you must tell us. I turned to look at Daniel. He pretended not to see me, utterly engrossed in examining an expensive watch in a display case. He was nothing like the bedraggled, hungry boy who had come to me before. As expected, he only acknowledged me when I was useful to him. When I wasn't, he wished I would disappear. I almost laughed. An idea began to form. Actually, I said slowly, injecting a note of manufactured desperation into my voice. Things are a bit tight for me right now. A friend's factory needs 100,000 yuan in investment. Since you're both doing so well, I wonder if you could lend it to me. The moment the number left my lips, Arthur's face turned a spectacular shade of crimson. The smugness evaporated, replaced by sheer panic and rage. Clara, all this time and you're still so shameless, he snapped. He turned to his family. Let's go. Some people aren't worth our sympathy. The 4 of them scurried away like startled cockroaches. As they turned the corner, Isabella shot me a triumphant look. Daniel, perhaps feeling a flicker of guilt, avoided looking at me altogether. After they were gone, I patted Marianne on the back. Can you find a way to investigate them? I asked. I'm sure something's off. 3 days later, the results came in. The news was so shocking it almost made me drop my teacup. Arthur had been making promotional appearances for a fake medicine company. I was genuinely surprised. Arthur had always prided himself on his aloof, principled nature. When he worked on research projects, he would apply for the smallest possible budget, to the point where no graduate students wanted to join his team. He considered commercial work beneath him. But once I saw who had arranged it, Isabella, I understood. In front of her, Arthur abandoned every principle he ever had. The main reason, of course, was money. Their funds had clearly run out, and Isabella, used to a certain comfort, had found a way to generate income. She had gotten in touch with a fake pharmaceutical company. Although Arthur had been reassigned to an administrative role, he still held the title of professor in a university's school of biomedicine. That title was enough to impress and deceive the company's target demographic: elderly men and women. At first, according to Marianne's source, Arthur had hesitated. How could I lie for money? He had reportedly said. But after receiving 1,000 yuan gift from the company, along with smooth assurances that the pills were just harmless vitamins, his scruples had vanished. He had already made over a dozen appearances for them and even filmed television advertisements. He had pocketed 30,000 to 40,000 yuan. A fortune in those days. No wonder that family had been walking around so high and mighty. But when I looked at the transcripts of what Arthur had said during those promotional events, my blood ran cold. He wasn't just vaguely endorsing a product. He was making specific, outrageous claims. This formulation can cure all manner of age-related ailments, he declared to a room of hopeful seniors. It doesn't just treat symptoms. It reverses the aging process at a cellular level. He was cheating elderly people out of their life savings, their coffin money. He was using his ravaged but still present academic credibility to sell them false hope. Arthur's bottom line was far lower than I had ever imagined. I must have been utterly blind to have once believed all his talk about being above worldly concerns. A cold fury settled in my heart. This was no longer just about personal revenge. This was about justice. Whether for one reason or the other, my path was clear. I went straight to the Public Security Bureau and reported the fake medicine company, providing them with all the evidence Marianne had gathered. At that time, the authorities were cracking down hard on fraud and public safety violations. They took my case very seriously. 3 days later, during one of the company's promotional meetings in a rented hotel ballroom, the police raided the event. They arrested everyone involved on the spot. Arthur Evans, professor of biomedicine, was among them. The news of Arthur's arrest spread through the university like wildfire. This wasn't just a personal scandal anymore. It was a criminal one. The university administration, which had already been humiliated by the wedding fiasco, now faced a full-blown crisis. A professor, one of their own, was involved in a scheme that preyed on the city's most vulnerable. I heard the details from Marianne, who had a friend in the Public Security Bureau. During the raid, Arthur had panicked. Realizing he couldn't escape, he had tried to hide his face, burying his head in his hands like a child. Even during the initial questioning, he refused to state his name or position, a pathetic attempt to preserve some shred of dignity. It didn't last long. The police simply asked a few of the elderly attendees, who were only too happy to identify the distinguished Professor Evans, who had so convincingly promised them a new lease on life. The looks the officers gave him after that were not just of contempt, but of profound disgust. A man with such high education, a supposed role model, sinking to this level for money was seen as the lowest form of betrayal. The police formally notified the university. The school's decision was swift and merciless. They couldn't afford the stain on their reputation. Arthur Evans was not just reassigned, he was summarily expelled. His career, the thing he had valued above all else, above his wife, above his son, above his own integrity, was over. The trial was a swift affair. The evidence was overwhelming. I attended the sentencing, sitting in the back of the public gallery. Arthur was led in, his beard unkempt, his shoulders slumped. His head hung so low his chin nearly touched his chest. There was no trace left of the aloof, refined man who had once seemed as serene as a chrysanthemum. This was a broken, defeated man, stripped of his titles, his pride, and his freedom. In the end, he was convicted of fraud. The sentence was 4 years in prison. It wasn't a long term, but for someone as obsessed with status and face as Arthur, it was a devastating, soul-crushing blow. As the judge read the verdict, he didn't look up. He simply allowed himself to be led away, a shell of his former self. As for me, because I had provided the tip that led to the dismantling of a company that had scammed countless ordinary people out of their life savings, I was quietly honored by the authorities. There was no ceremony, but a letter of commendation arrived, naming me a model citizen. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The tigress was a hero, the saint was a convict. On the day Arthur was sent to prison, Daniel came to see me again. This time there was no whining, no blame. He simply dropped to his knees on the rough concrete floor of the warehouse and begged, "Mom, please help me. Let me stay with you. I really know I was wrong. Mom, you can't just leave me like this." I looked down at him, this young man who was the physical reminder of my past life. I couldn't tell anymore whether he was truly remorseful or just switching allegiance to whoever was left standing. His father was in jail, his stepmother was undoubtedly making new plans that didn't include him, and he was adrift. I felt a sigh escape me, not of sadness but of finality. The well of maternal feeling was dry. All that was left was a sense of residual responsibility. "You're already 15, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I'll arrange for you to board at school. I'll send you a monthly allowance to cover average living expenses. I'll support you until you're an adult. And if you get into college, I'll pay for your studies." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But after everything that's happened, it's time you learn to grow up, Daniel. This is the extent of my help." He opened his mouth, perhaps to plead for more, to ask to live with me, but he saw the unyielding resolve in my eyes. In the end, he stayed silent. He just bowed his head and said softly, "I understand." It was the most mature interaction we had ever had. With Arthur in prison and Daniel provided for, a strange quiet settled over my life. The frantic energy of revenge and survival eased. I focused entirely on the business. Marianne and I were a formidable team. My head for numbers and organization complemented her flair for design and sales. We began to look beyond our city, establishing supply chains to the north and south. Scott and Evans Apparel started to become a known name, synonymous with quality and modern style for the working woman. I thought of Arthur sometimes in his cell. I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he ever connected the dots from my sudden change at the university to his public shaming at the wedding to his final downfall with the fake medicine company. I doubted it. Men like Arthur never see their own role in their destruction. They are always the victims of circumstance, of a cruel world, of a shrewish wife. I didn't care. My life was full and purposeful. The ghost of Clara Evans had been laid to rest. In her place was a successful businesswoman, a partner, a woman who had carved out her own destiny from the ruins of a lie. I assumed that was the end of the Arthur Evans chapter of my life. I was wrong. His story had one final tragic act to play. 4 years passed. The world outside changed and so did I. Our clothing business, Scott and Evans, had become one of the leading names in the regional market. We had a proper office, a staff of 20, and our designs were being featured in national magazines. The small dorm room was replaced by a comfortable apartment of my own. The money I earned was mine, the peace I enjoyed was mine, the future I was building was mine. Daniel, true to my word, had boarded at school. I sent the allowance every month, a transaction that was clinical and devoid of sentiment. He finished high school and, to my slight surprise, was admitted to a decent university in another province. I paid the tuition. We exchanged brief, necessary letters about logistics. There was no warmth, but there was also no animosity. It was a ceasefire brokered by distance and necessity. I heard snippets about Arthur's release from prison. He was a ghost in his own life. Expelled from the university, he had lost his assigned housing. He had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. His reputation ensured that no other academic institution would touch him, and his age and pride prevented him from finding any other meaningful work. It was about 6 months after his release that I received the news. Arthur had been sent back to prison. This time it was for manslaughter. The story, when I pieced it together from the newspaper reports and hushed conversations, was so sordid it was almost Shakespearean in its tragedy. After his release, Arthur had gone looking for Isabella. He still saw her as his soulmate, the great love for whom he had sacrificed everything. He eventually tracked her down to a rundown part of the city. He found his once pure and untouchable first love living with a middle-aged migrant worker, a coarse, rough-mannered man who worked in construction. The scene he stumbled upon was the final demolition of his illusions. Isabella was no delicate flower. She was engaged in a screaming match with a neighbor over a few pennies, her hair unkempt, her face contorted into a mask of rage. She looked every bit the street market shrew. And at her side, the man she was with behaved with a possessiveness that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Arthur snapped. All the pain, the humiliation, the loss. It boiled over into a blind, uncontrollable rage. He rushed forward shouting, "You! I went to prison for you. I ruined my life for you. And you dare do this to me?" Isabella, shocked to see him out of prison, was initially frightened. But with the burly man beside her, her fear quickly turned to scorn. "And whose fault is it?" she shrieked back. "You're useless. You couldn't even provide. Look at you. A convict, a beggar." The argument escalated, a torrent of venom and recrimination. The man she was with, seeing the situation spiraling, decided this was not his fight. The moment real trouble came, he turned and bolted, leaving Isabella to face Arthur's fury alone. Unfortunately for her, the spot where they were fighting was a shoddily maintained alleyway, littered with construction debris. As they struggled, Arthur shoved her. Isabella, caught off balance, fell backward. There was an exposed piece of rusty steel rebar jutting from a broken concrete block. It struck a vital spot. She died almost instantly. Arthur was arrested on the spot, covered in her blood, his mind shattered. He was later convicted of accidental homicide. This time the sentence was not a few years. It was life. When Marianne told me the final, grim details, we sat in silence for a long time. The office was bright and modern, a world away from that dirty alley. "He brought it on himself," I said finally, my voice quiet. It wasn't a statement of vengeance, but a simple, stark conclusion. Every choice he had made, the secret letters, the hypocrisy, the fraud, the blind obsession, had led him step by step to that moment. There was no satisfaction in it, only a profound, weary sadness for the waste of it all. The serene, detached professor had ended his days as a violent convict, his great love story culminating in a squalid, meaningless death. I thought of the man I had married 60 years ago in another life. I thought of the son we had raised. I thought of the home I had built. It all felt like a story about someone else, a sad and cautionary tale from a forgotten book. I turned my attention back to the fabric samples on my desk, to the order forms that needed signing. The past was a closed door. The future was a blank page, and I was determined to fill it with color, success, and a peace I had earned on my own terms. Another decade slipped by, marked not by personal drama, but by professional milestones. The late 1990s brought new opportunities, and Scott & Evans Apparel was perfectly positioned to seize them. We embraced new fabrics, bolder designs, and eventually opened our own flagship store in the heart of the city. Marianne handled the creative vision and I managed the business engine. We were a perfect partnership, built on trust, respect, and a shared history of overcoming adversity. Daniel graduated from university and found a job as a mid-level manager in a state-owned enterprise in a distant city. Our communication remained infrequent and functional. He had learned, I suppose, that the bank of maternal indulgence was permanently closed. He was self-sufficient, and for that I was glad. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had married, but I did not receive an invitation. I sent a modest financial gift through a bank transfer, a final discharge of my duty. He acknowledged it with a brief, formal note. It was the closure we both needed. I never remarried. I had no desire to. The experience of marriage had been, for me, a lesson in subjugation and deception. The freedom I had found in my second life was too precious to compromise. I had friends, I had my work, and I had the deep, abiding satisfaction of self-reliance. I took trips with Marianne, learned to paint, and even audited a few literature classes at the university. Not for a degree, but for the pure joy of learning, something I had never been able to do when my education was seen only as a precursor to being a good wife. One bright autumn afternoon, I was in my office on the top floor of our flagship store. The sun streamed in through the large windows, illuminating the sleek, modern furniture and the vibrant boards displaying our latest collection. I was reviewing the quarterly financial reports, a sense of quiet accomplishment settling over me. The numbers were strong. We had done it. We had built an empire from a single boutique. My secretary's voice came over the intercom. "Miss Evans, there's a Mr. Davies here to see you. He says he's an old friend." The name took a moment to register. Mr. Davies. The department head from the university, the one who had been so relieved by my understanding attitude all those years ago. "Send him in," I said, curious. He entered, an old man now, leaning on a cane. He looked around the office, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Clara Evans," he said, his voice filled with a kind of awe. "I heard you had done well for yourself, but this is remarkable." "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "It's been a long time." We made small talk about the old days, carefully avoiding the minefield of the past. He had retired years ago. He spoke of other colleagues, some who had passed, some who had moved away. Finally, he cleared his throat, his expression turning somber. "I don't know if you've heard," he said, "but Arthur passed away last week. In prison." I had not heard. The news landed not with a shock, but with a soft, final thud, like the last page of a long-finished book. "I see," I said, my voice even. "It was illness," Mr. Davies continued. "They said he was very quiet at the end. He had no visitors. Daniel made the arrangements for the cremation. It was all very simple." I nodded. A simple end for a man whose life had become a complex web of his own making. No poetry, no grand declarations of love, just a quiet, lonely death. "Thank you for telling me," I said. He looked at me, a strange mix of pity and respect in his eyes. "You know, Claire, back then, we all felt so sorry for Arthur. We thought he was trapped with a difficult woman." He shook his head, a faint blush of shame on his wrinkled cheeks. "We were fools. We didn't see what was really happening. We didn't see the strength it took for you to do what you did. To walk away. To build all this. He gestured around the office. You proved everyone wrong. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong, Mr. Davies. I was just trying to save myself. After he left, I stood by the window looking down at the bustling city below. The streets were filled with people, each with their own struggles, their own secrets, their own journeys. I thought of Arthur, of the twisted path his life had taken. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the man he became, but for the tragic waste of it all. He could have had a good life, a simple, honest life, if only he had been able to value what was in front of him. But his choices were his own, just as mine were my own. I had spent my first life building a cage for myself, believing it was a palace. I had spent my second life breaking free and forging a destiny I could be proud of. The ghost of the bitter, betrayed wife was gone. The uncertainty of the reborn avenger was gone. All that remained was Clara Evans, business owner, partner, and a woman who had learned finally to live for herself. The sun was warm on my face. How wonderful it was, I thought, to truly understand that good and evil always come full circle. The tigress was a myth, a story told by a man to hide his own weakness. The real woman had not been fierce but resilient. Not hard but unbreakable. In this life I had indeed lived brilliantly. And the best part was the story was far from over. The end.